Today I want to tell you about a game that I picked up at Gen Con 2014 and it has been sitting humbly and unassumingly on my shelf since a week ago or so. I don't know why I hadn't given it a try. I finally decided to play it and oh well, that was quite an experience. Sit comfortably, sit tight. This review will take a while. This is probably going to be the longest or one of the longest reviews I've ever filmed. But this game is so innovative and so original in so many regards that as I give you my overview, I want to get a little more deeper. I want to give you a little bit of extra detail about the design and the mechanics. I really want to give you a sense of how this game is innovative and how it stands out from many other games with similar topics and some similar mechanics. But I really think that this design achieves something quite unique, at least something I hadn't seen before, something that maybe you have seen, but I dare say is not very common. In generally speaking, Shadows of Malice is a fantasy game, a cooperative fantasy game, fully cooperative. All the players work together against the evil creature, the evil demon, the essence of evil that is trying to manifest onto the fantasy world where the story takes place. And the heroes are sort of superhuman, semi-divine creatures that incarnate in physical form in that world. So you don't have the typical dragon versus knight or dwarf or elf. It has this game, the setting has a bit of a metaphysical wrinkle to it, which is refreshing and innovative too. But as you will see, it is really in the ideas at the core of the game that the game differs. The game is very different from many others. Enough with the fluff, let me tell you how Shadows of Malice plays, and since my overview will be longer than usual, if you decide that you want to skip to the conclusions, that's fine by me. I will not hold it against you. No hard feelings, promise. I'll try not to have any. Game is played on a board that will look more or less like this one. There are other terrain tiles that you can use. So you will use some terrain tiles to represent the landscape in which the characters will be acting, and then there is also a tile representing the dark realm where the shadows live, and the shadows will be trying to escape from there to come and mess up things here in your world. Let's take a closer look at the map and at the things that we'll find on it. This is one of the counters that represent the heroes. As you can see, they're pretty generic, pretty abstract. They do not represent your stereotypical hero, but you will see why that is important, because you don't have stereotypical heroes in this game. Then you have citadels or strongholds. On the other side, there is a well, which can be a dark well, such as this one, or another dark well, or it can be a well of light. Your heroes are trying to find the wells of light and to open them all. If the heroes manage to open all of them, then they win the game. However, there are also evil monsters that are coming out from there, and if they manage to take control of a well of light, then they will morph into the big bad guy. If that happens, if the super villain of the game manifests in this world, then that villain will try to move around and destroy the other wells of light. When the big villain manifests in this world, then the victory condition for the hero changes. At that point, they had to destroy the big villain to win the game. So there will be rules. So there is an AI that determines the behavior and movement of the villains, both the minions that are trying to open a well of light and take control of it, and then the big bad guy. Here we have tokens indicating layers where there are monsters and also where there is a treasure. These areas are stocked with treasure. The heroes can get in there, defeat a monster, and get a treasure. Then they need to remove the token to indicate that that area is not stocked with treasure anymore. If the heroes come back, they can still fight against monsters. The area will be repopulated, but now it won't be certain that there will be a treasure there. There's still a small chance that there will be a treasure, but not a big one. Mystics, there are several possible mystics represented by by counters. At the beginning of the game, you shuffle the counters for the mystics together. You place them on the board on specific areas, and then when the players visit a mystic, they will flip the mystic, they will look at the symbol that represent what the mystic can do for them, and also every mystic can also brew potions. If the heroes bring a certain resource to the mystic can turn them into powerful potions that the heroes can use. Cities work similar lead to mystics in that the players need to move there to reveal and figure out what is the specialty of the city, what is that the city can do for them, and then they can recruit the help of the people of the city to gain a certain advantage. Different cities will give the player different advantages, and since there are more possible cities than there are locations for cities on the map, you will not use all the cities from game to game, which will add unpredictability and variety to the games. Now, when a turn starts, the heroes will get to act. Heroes can move and they can perform an action from a possible list. Heroes have an amount of movement points which is determined randomly each turn. The heroes need to roll a die, and whatever is the result, they will add 2 points, and that will be the number of movement points that they receive. They roll a 1, then they have 3 movement points. However, together with your movement roll, you also roll another die of a different color for no reason than if you roll the same result on both dice, you still get your normal number of movement points, but you also draw a card from the fate deck and you put it in front of it and you resolve it immediately. It can be anything: good stuff, bad stuff, events, curses, blessings. It's fate, so you don't know what you're gonna find. Once you have your movement points, you can spend them to move on the map. Different types of terrain that you enter or cross will cost different amounts of points. Here is the explanation. As you can see, roads and bridges only cost half. Other types of terrain are pretty tough to move through, like wild areas or mountains especially. You can enter water, but only from specific areas, such as this one that have that symbol there to indicate that that's where you can find a boat, and then you can keep moving on water, and you can also get out of the water anywhere you want, but at that point you're leaving the boat behind, so if you want to go back on the river, you need to find another location to get on the river or walk on a bridge. As for your possible actions, after movement you can use the service of a mystic or the service of a city. You can fight a monster in an area if you are in that area. You can also try to provoke an encounter with the monsters. If you're adjacent to an area where monsters are known to be, then you can roll a die. You need to pass a luck roll. A luck roll is a roll in which you roll a d6 and you need to roll more than the target number of the challenge that you're taking. In this case, you're trying to roll more than 4. If you're lucky, then you will fight with the monster that is there in your area. So you don't even have to get there, and the good thing is also that there's an advantage to fight the monsters outside of your natural environment. So you can either provoke an engagement, start an engagement. There are a couple of other actions that you can perform and that count as actions. Then there are also non-actions. There are things that you do, but they do not count against the number of actions that you can perform in a turn. Things such as spending soul shards, represented by these gems here. For example, you spend these shards to give them to the mystics to brew potions. They can be used for a variety of effects, such as getting bonuses in combat, using special abilities that you have, a lot of stuff. Using those is a thing that you do, but doesn't count as an action. Using your powers and abilities usually doesn't count as an action. Also, you can form bands. That is, if you are together with another hero, you do not have to form a band. You're in the same area, but not really working together, and we indicate that by placing the counters not one exactly on top of the other with the same alignment, or they can form a band, in which case If they're working in conjunctions, the hero have a huge advantage when they're fighting in combat. However, they have a penalty when they're moving, because when the players in a band are rolling to determine their movement, they will move at the lowest rate that is rolled that turn. As for the heroes themselves, they are these incarnations of the energy of light and good and hope that simply take physical form in this world. When they do that, which they do at the beginning of the game, they receive a mastery. This is a card with a special ability that character has. Some are super good and they will always work. Some are much more situational. Some do not make much sense, so definitely are not useful if you're playing with a smaller map or if you're playing in solitaire. So you can also just choose one such ability. The standard rules say that you need to draw a random one, but there's really nothing to prevent you from choosing mastery for each player. You also receive a standard starting pool of colorless soul shards, which are flexible and eclectic. You can use them for a variety of things, but they're not all that powerful. Or colored shards, which you can use to activate more powerful effects, but they're a little more specialized, therefore they're more situational in their use. And as you can see, your mastery will give you a standard benefit represented by the symbol. Here, for example, you have extra health, extra shards, extra movement. I'm going for the easy extra defense, extra bonus in combat roll. I'm going for the ones with the symbol, so we don't need to read the rules for the card. Extra defense for you. The opponent has a penalty when attacking you. So you have an ability given by your master which is always active, and then you have an ability that, in order to be activated, requires the expenditure of a soul shard of the specific color. And yes, some masters do require colorless, but a lot require colored soul shards of a specific color. You also have life points represented by these tokens. These tokens have a side with two halves, as you can see, because when you take a hit, you flip the token over, and you may have lost a health point because you got a wound, in which case this side will look like this, and wounds can be healed fairly easily, or you may have lost a health point to a drain, and drains are slightly harder to recover from. There's less effects that allow you to recover from a wound. At the end of a turn, also the characters will recover, and each character will recover a health point that was lost to a wound, but there's only 50% chance that you will recover from a drain, because you need to roll a D star. D star is a very interesting roll. It simply means that half of the times you will get 0 and half of the time 1, which means 50% of the D star is 0 and the other 50% is 1. You roll 1 to 3 means 0, 4 to 6 means 1. Of course, you can also flip a coin or any other form that you have to randomize a 50% chance. So drains, you roll a D star, and if you get a 1, then you recovered a point, you recover from a drain. Now, combat, this is good. Combat is exceedingly simple to explain, but it has then a lot of interesting wrinkles when you resolve it. Combat will happen against monsters. Now, where are the cards? Where are the miniatures represent the monsters? No such thing. These are all the monsters. These are hundreds of monsters that you will not see, but the advantage is that there will be an endless stream and variety of monsters coming out of the creature generator. Yes, forget about the standard dragon, about the standard zombie. In this game, the animals and beasts and even regular villains of the land have been corrupted by evilness, and they've started developing strange abilities, tentacles where they're not supposed to have any. Huge variety and unpredictability. So when you encounter a villain, you roll 3d6 and you apply each roll to one area of the creature generator. And if you just use your imagination instead of looking at an illustration like you would have in other games, it is just so fun. It's just so incredible to fight against a huge variety of monsters. The first roll determines the type of creature. You cross-reference the result that you rolled with the terrain in which you are, and maybe you'll find a big crazy bird, a big fish, a big insect, big reptile, big mammal, and so on and so forth. This is good for thematic purposes. You can imagine the creature, but then also there are game effects that target certain types of monsters rather than others. You determine with the second roll the power of the creature, and simply look at the column. This is for guardians. This is for when you're entering a stronghold trying to reveal a well of light or maybe darkness. You need to fight against one of these guys. You don't roll the dice. You always get these stats, which are very powerful. When you're rolling to determine the power of a creature, there's a +1 to your roll if you're fighting the creature in its natural environment. So the creatures don't have that bonus if you have provoked an encounter outside of their home hex. Look at this, and this tells you the power. This is a value that is used to activate certain abilities of the monsters, like the monster does XYZ if it rolls more or less, if it rolls less than the power. This is a bonus that the monster gets to combat roll, can be anywhere between +0 and +3. This is the extra wounds that the monster gives you, so if the monster hits you, you get a standard 1 wound, and then you may get a D star, 2D star, 3D stars. Just to make sure that we are clear, 3D stars means anything between a total of 0 and 3. And this is the number of life tokens that, of course, you need to reduce to 0 to defeat the monster. Then you roll another die, and that tells you whether the creature has abilities or not. If there are wells of light on the board, the number is reduced by 1, the roll is reduced by 1. For each well of darkness that you inadvertently opened, there is a penalty for you and a bonus for them, because the more abilities they have, the nastier things become. There is a big chubby deck of possible abilities, and you draw the abilities of your monster from here. And because of this, the monster can have all sorts of abilities. Remember, you shuffle, and by shuffling the deck, the cards will come out in different orders, in different combinations, and from game to game you will have incredibly different monsters. Let me give you an example. Here we have this monster here. So we have a 2 here, and imagine we are in the desert, then we find the big insect. You can imagine whichever you like. It's a big desert grasshopper, big worm. It's a big Dune style of worm. With a 3, it is medium strength. Well, it could be weak, but alas, we're meeting him in his home hex, so actually is getting medium strong. Not the weakest, but fairly annoying already. And with a roll of 4, and suppose no modifiers, in terms of wells of light, then we have 1 ability. Then we are drawing a card from this deck, and maybe we found a parasitic worm. And when an avatar, that be you, is hit by the creature, then you must make a luck roll against the creature's power. Otherwise, the creature drains life from the avatar. It could be an enemy that makes a terrifying crying, and because of that, you're so scared, and it's hard to hit him. The creature has the uncanny ability to anticipate and neutralize the opponent's combat maneuvers. It's like those big insects in that movie with Tom Cruise, like Edge of Tomorrow. They can see the future. Or it's a very agile big bug. It's a big bug with a lethal aura. This we encountered. Once you have the lethal aura, you determine with the type of lethal aura that it has, and that can inflict damage on you when you're wounding it. So, for example, maybe his blood is full of acid, and then that goes against you, just sprinkles against you, alien style, when you're hitting him. this is just one of the many possible monsters. Maybe next time you will have a small mammal with no superpowers, just imagine a general wild boar. The following time you have an arboreal, like a tree, a living tree, which is super strong and also is impervious to damage, and but it's very agile. Maybe it doesn't jump around but moves with his little living branches so fast that it's a pain. Maybe next time you will have a giant snake which can hypnotize you and can drain your life, and is very ferocious. And then the following time you will have a protean, sort of like ooze type of creature that has the ability to enfeeble you and to suck your magic. It's incredible. As for combat is very easy to resolve. It's a sequence of combat rounds in which simply you roll a die for the bad guy and you roll a die for yourself. You add modifiers, the highest result hits the opponent and applies the damage, which is a base of 1 point of damage, altered again by modifiers. If I say like this, it sounds boring, but when you have all of the abilities that come into account, the enemy inflicts you a penalty of minus D2 or minus 2D star, but if you hit him, then you deal extra damage, and maybe of a special type of damage that the monster is particularly prone to, or maybe the monster is impervious to many damages. Then you try to use magic from soul shards, because you can use them to give yourself bonuses on top of the bonuses that you have from your own weapons, from potions, from equipment, from possibly your mastery. It seems like it's silly, just that's it, but actually it's fantastic because it rewards you for the stuff that you found, for the leveling up that you managed to have, and also for the use of resources, because you had to choose how many of your shards you want to use and when and how. Fantastic combat system that takes all of the effort from looking at combat tables, and it puts it right where it should be, which is on the tactical thinking and on the use of resources. Also, if it's several heroes banding against an enemy, then they can roll multiple dice. You roll to determine randomly which of the heroes is going to be attacked. And you can spend a shard actually to become the target. If you're here and if your friend is particularly weak, you don't want the monster to eat his head off, then you spend a shard to attract the monster, so you'll be the one that is attacked. Once you do that, then the person that is attacked rolls a die for him or herself, plus a die for each friend in the band that is actively fighting. Because during fight you can choose to do other things, to read a scroll, to use a potion, to read a book. I hope it's not just for hobbies, but it's a book that you're gonna need. There are actions that you can perform, or you can just say, no, I'm just fighting. If you're fighting, you are lending dice to the pool of dice that will be rolled by your friend. So maybe it's 3 heroes, but this turn, one of them is drinking a potion, and the other one is reading a scroll for good effects. Next time, the monster comes back in, and they are all actively fighting. Then one of them needs to recover and drink a potion to heal, and then only 2 of them are fighting. Oh my gosh, so much stuff goes on in this simple idea. Roll a die or a couple of dice, look at the highest results. Of course, when you have a band of heroes that are rolling, you look at the highest result. Just this, roll the dice, add modifiers, and see who does it best. That's simple, and yet that great. The experience is great. Once the heroes are done acting, they can recover, and then the bad guys take their turn. Just simplifying things to the core, what happens is that if there are no enemies here, you place a bad guy here, a marker for the bad guy with some life points underneath. Each turn that monster stays in the realm of the evil people will gain an extra point. The monster will then move randomly, you roll a die, and will try to reach one of these hexes here, which are gates. The gates to our world at the beginning are sealed, and if the monster bumps into one of them, takes a damage. However, then the monster walks back right in there. The monster gains extra life. So the longer it stays there, the stronger it will become. And these gates also will open over time when the monster at some point will certainly enter one of these gates, and maybe at that point the monster is a big pile of light tokens. The monster is teleported on the board onto one of the teleporting gates on the board, and from that moment on the monster will move into a straight line to try to reach the strongholds. If the monster gets there, there will be a simplified version of combat in which you will see if the shadow wins or the guardian that is there wins. If the guardian is defeated, then the shadow reveals the well, and if it is a well of light, then the final phase of the game begins with the manifestation of the big bad villain, the super demon that you're trying to prevent from manifesting into the world, represented by this scary token. Which means that the heroes need to intercept the monster, the shadow monster, as that monster travels towards the closest stronghold, and need to try to kill it, or at least to weaken it enough to then have a good chance that the guardian will defeat the monster. A lot of things can happen. Maybe you will not, maybe you're on one side of the world because you have a very strong band of heroes, which is great, but then it exposes you to the danger of not being able to stop a shadow if it manifests on the other side of the board and runs quickly to a stronghold. And maybe the shadow will defeat a guardian, and maybe that will be quote unquote good for you, because then that will be revealed as a well of darkness. So actually the bad guy took down a guardian that otherwise you would have needed to take care of. That revealed you important information, but then you need to still try to destroy or weaken the shadow before it finds a good well. A lot of stuff can happen here. And there are a lot of other things that I will not be able to cover. If you find a well of light, for example, then you gain radiance, which is another aspect of the game. You gain a token from a pool of 10 possible tokens with 10 different advantages. Again, imagine just the amount of replayability that you have from the fact that when you level up, you don't just get an extra die, you get an extra ability, 1 of 10, and that can be different every time. Add to that different masteries, different monsters, different everything, different potions. This is really more than just a game. It is a generator of story. There's a creature generator, but everything in the game is a well, not of light, of darkness only, but it's a well of potential, of narrative potential that are just waiting to be explored. A lot of variety from the Fate, unbelievable replay value. Shadows of Malice is very different from any other fantasy game that I played. Maybe there are other games that are very similar to this one, and I don't know of them, maybe overlooked them, but I'm pretty confident to say that if there are such games, there aren't many. There isn't a family of games that this game borrows from. It feels to me like when you play fantasy games very often, you had the sense that the designer picked up a copy of Descent or Hero Quest and thought, okay, what can I tweak here? What can I change here to make it my own, to make it something different? But here with Shadows of Malice, I had the impression that the process was completely different. The designer tossed away all of the other fantasy games and started afresh, just thinking, okay, what should be in a fantasy game? What's a fantasy game done the way it should be? What would I like? What are the good things? What are the strongest things? And one of the strongest things is the variety of possible encounters that you have. But in fantasy games, you have 10, 15 classes of monsters, depending on how many the publisher had decided to invest on to put in a box. Here you have a world of monsters. They are never the same, and if they're the same, they feel different because maybe you encountered the same monster 10 games before, in a different location, in a different situation, when you have different objects, when you have different abilities. It changes. You have this explosion of possible encounters, and that to me already is like, wow. When I learned about the generator monster, I was already super excited. I thought that was such a great idea. And everything else in the game, I think, has been done to give you a really a sense of an open world. The game has a strong story. In a certain sense, you may be worried at the beginning that the plot is going to be a little too similar from game to game, because the plot is going to be that early on the heroes are trying to kill monsters to become stronger so they can defeat the guardians that are controlling the wells. Then the heroes are trying to find the wells of light, and you have to repeat that a little bit, but it's not that obvious, because of course then heroes can get wounded, they can die, and then they reincarnate. There's a penalty for that, so dying is still not just a walk in the park. At the same time, you're not kicked out of the game if your character dies. If your avatar is destroyed, then the energy takes another form, which, by the way, is also narratively consistent way of explaining why the character is back. And you start afresh with your energy shaped differently, with different mastery. There are the games that try to do that in more stretch ways, since this game is really about this fantasy world being manipulated by these shapeless forms that keep redefining themselves and finding new manifestations. That part of the story makes perfect sense. So early on, the heroes are looking for artifacts, trying to get stronger, finding some wells, getting radiances, which are these special abilities that for all intents and purposes correspond to leveling up in other games. But you do not know when you have to stop and interrupt that, because the shadows are coming from the world of darkness. So a lot of tough decisions. You can be a band, but then you're in a single area, and the shadows may sneak out into the world in another area. You may break up in small groups, but then each group is going to have a harder time fighting against the monsters. Sometimes you may be able to win easily and quickly. You just found the 2 wells, that's the first 2 wells that you opened, and the shadows never really were a factor. Sometimes a lot of small shadows will come in because they end up hitting the gates of the world of darkness very often. Other times you have these monstrous stacks of life counters that pile up under a single mega shadow, and that's a very visual, very effective way of creating a countdown in which you're seeing the monster growing up, and you know that at some point, the longer it takes gathering energy on the other side of the world, the harder it is going to be for you to defeat or to weaken that monster when the monster crosses over. Sometimes the shadows will help you by destroying some of the pits. Sometimes the demon will manifest itself, and then you'll have the final big boss fight. Sometimes you don't. The story, the general plot can be overall similar, but there's just so much variety in the episodes. There is so much a change in everything else, so much variations around that plot, when and how the shadows manifest themselves, whether or not the demon comes out, that this will keep the game fresh for quite a while. At the micro level of each single encounter, at the macro level of the overall plot. Okay, we changed location just because the battery of the camera was dying, so I had to go and plug it somewhere. But this also allowed me to take a break. I realized that maybe it was getting a little manic sounding, but because this game does excite me. Now, trying to talk about some other angles. The rulebook does a decent, not excellent job in explaining the game. The information is pretty much all there, but it is not always where it should be. For example, after an encounter, you will gain some soul shards and you will gain some treasures, but how much of each you get, and the fact that you get these 2 benefits is explained in 2 different parts of the rulebook. Things like this. And there isn't an index. I would recommend highly to go on Board Game Geek. A lot of other people that like the game made a lot of very, very useful player aids. From a detailed player turn structure, which is not in the game. It's also very useful to teach the game to somebody and to yourself. It allows you to simply go through the steps and to learn how the turn works. Then you have player mats, very useful to organize cards, counters, soul shards, fate cards, and things like that. And also other things of this type, including an index of the book. So just get your printer ready, get some of the stuff that is not in the box, but it's not a tragedy because you can complement what you have in the box, which is a perfectly playable game, by the way. It's not a huge deal. It's just that you can complement that with materials that will facilitate getting into the game even more. Another thing, probably the only thing that I guess may make this game not for everybody, is that in most cases it will take quite a while to play. You just have to know what you are sinking your teeth into. Don't be fooled by the fact that the map looks like this big. This game is no filler. What you're seeing there is a window on a world, and the closer you get, the more you magnify, the more of an holographic sense you have. That is, the closer you see, that you look, things still look three-dimensional and detailed. So it will easily be the game of the night. Don't be surprised if it takes 3 hours, 4 hours to play, depending on the number of players. With proficient players, the game moves faster, but still sometimes you want to enjoy the story, you want to talk about this or that, and the story may just take longer if you reach a sort of state of balance in which you are fighting off the shadows that are coming. At the same time, by doing that, you're not working too much on opening the wells, but that will not last forever. The game will not reach complete mechanical balance because of this. It may last longer, it may last a little less. If you decide to be daring and let the shadows go and start opening the wells, that will speed things up, but they may also be that just will simply precipitate your demise in the game. So at the end you will find yourself a little exhausted if the game took 3 or 4 hours, but no more than when you're playing other games of this I would say complexity. It's not complex to play. I would say of this richness. It's a game that is so thematically rich. You find a sort of like, I don't know, the slight soreness that you find in your muscles after like a nice hike or a good hour at the gym, which is both like ow, ouch, ouch, and yet at the same time there's a sense of pleasure of that exhaustion. Sometimes after I travel through the world of Shadows of Malice, I am just there after playing the game for hours, recalling the crazy events, how we were attacked on the river by a gigantic turtle that had poisonous foam that came out of the mouth and tentacles on the shells. Or then we were attacked by this gigantic eagle that was able to do also crazy stuff, surrounded by an electric field and could read our minds and mess up with our minds. All these crazy encounters that somehow do not feel ridiculous. They don't feel like they are the Monty Python parody of a traditional Game of Thrones / Lord of the Rings fantasy world. The game is consistent enough thematically to make it acceptable and to make it desirable. That indeed you're seeing things that resemble animals and monsters that you know from elsewhere, but in modified, corrupted form. That makes it more interesting without breaking the illusion of thematic consistency. Shadows of Malice, the sleeper agent of 2014. It has been just sitting there on my shelf like any other game, and as soon as I started playing it, it was not just any other game. It was a great game, a game that I loved, that absolutely I love immensely. One of the best games that I played in 2014. If you love fantasy but you're tired of reiterations of the system, reiteration of the formulas that you've seen elsewhere, look no further. Have a look at Shadows of Malice. This is a game that clearly has a lot of love that went into it. Really looks like a labor of love. It is a game with so much character, so much personality. Fun to play, million of decisions to make, endless stories that this game can generate. A game that I like, Shadows of Malice, a game like no other.